welcome. You know, whenever businesses make deals, especially across borders, there's always a big question of trust. If you're a seller, how can you be sure you're going to get paid by a buyer who's thousands of miles away? And if you're the buyer, how do you know the seller will actually ship what you paid for? To bridge this gap, businesses use something called a letter of credit. It's basically a formal promise from a bank. Today, we're going to carefully break down the two main types because they offer security in two very, very different ways. And that brings us to the really interesting puzzle at the center of all this. You've got two financial tools from a bank that both seem to promise payment. But here's the twist. Their intentions are complete opposites. One is designed to be the normal way you get paid when a deal goes smoothly. The other one? Well, it's a safety net that everyone involved truly hopes they'll never, ever have to use. Getting this one difference is the key to understanding everything else. And this is where things can get a little tricky for a lot of people. It can feel like you're standing at a fork in the road. Choosing the wrong path or mistaking one type of letter of credit for another can cause some serious confusion about how a deal is actually secured. So our whole goal today is to draw a clear map so you know exactly which path to take and why. So here's how we're going to break it all down step by step. First, we'll look at the core purpose of each one. What is it actually for? Then we'll get into what makes the bank pay out. After that, we'll look at the paperwork involved and the roles that buyers and sellers play. And finally, we'll run through some common questions before we wrap up with the main takeaways. All right, let's start with the biggest and most important difference of all. It really just comes down to their purpose. As we go through this first part, just keep this one simple idea in your head. Is this tool designed to make a payment happen, or is it there to protect someone if a payment fails? So let's look at this side by side. On the left, you have the Commercial Letter of Credit, or CLC. This is the main event. It's the engine that powers the payment for the transaction. But on the right, you have the Standby Letter of Credit, or SBLC. This is completely different. It's like an emergency backup, a last resort guarantee that only gets used if something goes wrong. Let's put a clear definition on that. A Commercial Letter of Credit, or CLC, is a primary payment mechanism. That means when a buyer and seller use one, the seller fully expects to present documents to the bank and get paid. This is the normal, successful, everything went right pathway for the deal. A really helpful way to think about a CLC is to imagine it's a cashier's check. See, when a bank gives you a cashier's check, the money is already set aside and guaranteed. The person receiving it knows the funds are safe. All they have to do is fulfill their end of the deal and present the right proof, like a shipping document, and the bank will cash it. The whole point is for it to be cashed. Now let's look at the complete opposite. A Standby Letter of Credit, or SBLC, is a financial safety net. It is not the main way anyone hopes to get paid. It's designed to sit in the background and only spring into action if one party fails to do what they promised to do. And the absolute best analogy for an SBLC is an insurance policy. Think about it. You pay for your insurance, but you really hope you never have to file a claim. An SBLC works the exact same way. A business gets one for protection, for that worst-case scenario. But the perfect outcome for everyone is that it just sits there, unused, and eventually expires. Okay, so if their purposes are complete opposites, it makes perfect sense that the thing that makes them pay out would be completely different too. This is what we call the trigger, and it gets to the heart of how they work. With a commercial LC, the trigger is a positive event. It's all about successful performance. The seller does what they promised, they ship the goods, then they take the documents that prove they shipped the goods to the bank. The bank checks the paperwork, and if it's all in order, they pay the seller. It's the transaction going exactly as it should. But with a standby LC, the trigger is a negative event. It's a failure. For example, a buyer fails to pay an invoice on time. The person who is supposed to get paid, the beneficiary, then simply goes to the bank and declares that this failure happened. The bank then pays them to make them whole. This is that uh-oh path, the one that signals something in the deal has broken down. So since one is triggered by success and the other by failure, you can probably guess that the paperwork required for each is going to be very different. And this is so important because the bank makes its entire decision based only on the documents it sees. For a commercial LC, the documents are all about creating a paper trail that proves performance. The seller has to gather a whole set of commercial papers, things like the invoice, a list of what's in the boxes, maybe an inspection certificate. But the most important one is usually the bill of lading. That's the official document from the shipping company that proves the goods are on their way. Now, compare all that paperwork to this. For a standby LC, the documentation is often shockingly simple. It can be just a brief written statement. It's not about proving goods were shipped. It's just a simple, direct declaration that somebody failed to do something they were supposed to do, like pay an invoice. It's minimal because its only job is to state that a default occurred. Next up, let's talk about the people involved. In any letter of credit, there is an applicant, the person who asks the bank for it, and a beneficiary, the person who's protected by it. But who plays which role isn't always as straightforward as you might think. Let's look at this chart. In a standard commercial LC, it's pretty simple. The buyer is the applicant. They go to the bank to get the LC to reassure the seller. That makes the seller the beneficiary who gets paid. But look at the standby LC column. The roles can flip. A seller, like a construction contractor, could be the applicant. They might get an SBLC to guarantee to the project owner that they'll finish the job on time. In that case, the project owner, the buyer of the services, is the beneficiary. This just shows how flexible the SBLC can be. We have the main differences down now, but to make sure this all really sticks, let's go over a couple of common questions that almost always come up when you start working with these tools. This is such a critical concept. When we say the bank's obligation is independent, it means the bank lives in a world of paper. They don't deal with the actual goods or services. So if a beneficiary demands payment, the bank is not going to check if the goods that were shipped were the right color or if there was a dispute about quality. Their only job is to look at the documents. If the documents presented match exactly what the letter of credit asked for, the bank must pay. Period. Here's another common point of confusion. People often ask, well, isn't a standby LC just another name for a bank guarantee? And it's a fair question. They do seem similar. They both offer security. But there is a very important legal difference that makes the standby LC a much more powerful and certain tool for the person it's protecting. And here's that difference. A standby LC is what's called a primary obligation. That means the bank's promise to pay stands on its own, separate from the main contract. A traditional guarantee, on the other hand, is a secondary obligation. That means the bank's promise is tied to the contract. So if there's a dispute, the bank can use the same legal defenses the applicant has to avoid paying. This makes getting paid under a standby LC much, much more certain. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, from purpose and triggers to documents and roles. Let's bring it all home now with a final summary to make sure that key takeaways are crystal clear. So if you remember just one thing from our discussion today, let it be this. The commercial LC is the engine of payment. It's designed to drive the transaction forward when everything is going right. The standby LC, on the other hand, is the seatbelt for protection. It's there just in case of a crash, a failure, or a default. Just keep that fundamental contrast in your mind: payment versus protection. And to finish up, I'll leave you with a little scenario to think about. Imagine you want to make sure a contractor finishes a big construction project on time. Which tool would you use? Are you trying to facilitate a payment, or are you trying to protect yourself against a failure to perform? I genuinely love to see your answers and your reasoning in the comments below. If you found this methodical breakdown helpful, please consider liking it so others can find it, and of course, subscribe for more sessions like this. Thank you so much for your time and for joining me today.